the meteorologist in charge of the National Weather Service Center in Wakefield. And he's been serving the National Weather Service for approximately 30 years. My goodness. A good thing you're not a dog, because 7 years and 30, whoo, sorry, Jeff. Anyway, Jeff graduated from Florida State University in 1994 with a degree in meteorology and began his 28-year career serving in the Pensacola. He then served in Austin and San Antonio offices 95 to 98 before returning to the Mid-Atlantic, serving in the Morehead City, Raleigh National Weather Service area till 2011. In 2011, Jeff returned to Virginia. Welcome, Jeff, and became their meteorologist in charge at the Wakefield office. Jeff has spent most of his career working with core partners in emergency management and immediate and attention to, in addition, to collaborating with local, state, and federal government agencies. Jeff is our go-to guy when we ever have a question about weather, storms, anything coming over the horizon. He's on our speed dial here in Norfolk, and we're definitely going to call him and get his opinion on what the outlook is. So one of our favorite sons. Jeff, you're up today.
Hey, thank you, Scott. Let me see if I'm sharing my screen here real quick. Should work. Let's see. Entire screen. There we go. You should be seeing it here very soon. Did you get it yet?
There we go. It just popped in.
Okay. Yeah, hopefully it'll keep up as I go. If it gets behind or if I get ahead of the slides, just let me know, Scott. And as folks if you guys have questions as we go, I don't know if somebody can raise your hand or send a chat. Maybe Scott, if you can monitor the chat room or something. That way, as we go, if folks have questions, they can just put them in the chat, and then we can kind of address it as we go versus waiting to the end. Is that okay with you, Scott?
Yeah, that's fine, Jeff. And I'll monitor the chat and interrupt you on a pause with the important questions that come up, because everybody's looking forward to this upcoming hurricane season with all the talk about how busy we're going to be. So yeah, you'll probably have several questions for you.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I guess that bio was 2 years old. I hit 30 years this year, so this is my 30th year in the Weather Service. I passed it in April, so I'm officially 30 years in federal government. So that was kind of exciting, neat benchmark to pass. Anyway, that's my email address. So you guys can take a picture of it or just jot it down if you need to kind of follow up. You guys want to reach out to me afterwards, or you want us to come out and talk to any of your groups or engage you guys in a even a shorter presentation than this. You just reach out to me and let me know. Or if you have any follow-up questions, just feel free to reach out to me. That's my email address. Let me see if I can make it advance here. Yeah, the biggest thing about this slide is just, we are 24/7. We're there in Wakefield, so we're always operating around the clock. This is a little bit of a dated picture. I need to update that operations picture. We actually have even more monitors than that. Each workstation has about 5 monitors that down low, and then about 3 monitors up high. So we have many more screens than what you see in some of these pictures here. But basically, we have 8 workstations, and we do everything from this one little operations center, from issuing the tornado warnings to coordinating hurricanes, all the marine forecasting. It's all done right there at the Wakefield office, and that is our phone number. So that's actually an unlisted phone number. But if you need to get hold of a forecaster, any time of day, that's a number folks can use to kind of come in and talk to a forecaster. And honestly, even our public line, if folks dial 899-4200, that's our public line. And if people press 0, it actually comes straight through to operations. So we do answer the phone 24 hours a day. We have 2 people there all the time. So we get a lot of marine callers and things like that, boaters and stuff that do call in early in the morning, trying to get some information, especially on the marine side. But that's just kind of a number there that you can call anytime and get weather information. All right, so yeah, we're here talking about hurricane season. It's just around the corner. Sometimes we've had a storm form by now, these little, what they call subtropical storms. But the official start of hurricane season will be June 1st, and it runs all the way through November 30th. So it's pretty late in the fall. And we'll talk a little bit more about the hurricane seasons and how the seasons play out. But at the start of the hurricane season is just around the corner. There's a few things that are new this year, not a whole lot. There's some things that are new from the Hurricane Center that don't really affect you guys. Probably the thing that's the most interesting is that all the advisories now are also going to be available in Spanish. So there are going to be Spanish translated products coming from the National Hurricane Center. And so if you do have a population there that speaks Spanish, or you want to get hold of Spanish advisories, those are available this year. So it kind of lists out here, kind of what's being provided, by the Net Hurricane Center in Spanish. So you kind of see weather.gov/translate is the website there to go get some of the Spanish products. So that's something that is new this year. That some folks, you guys might be interested if you have a substantial Spanish-speaking population that you're working with. All right, so get right into it. I mean, folks want to know what to expect this year. This forecast here comes from Colorado State University. And so this is CSU does a forecast every year. NOAA will come out with their forecast. I'm trying to think. Is it this week or next week? It's either this Thursday or next Thursday. NOAA will come out with their 2024 hurricane outlook. It will be very similar to this. It may not be, number for number, but everybody's looking at the same trends. Everybody's kind of looking at the same models and the sea surface temperatures, and looking at what's going to happen in the Pacific Ocean with the La Nina over there. And so we're all looking at the same ingredients. And so this is the forecast here. On the right-hand side, these are what we consider to be normal. So in a normal year, we'd have about 15 named storms. So 15 tropical storms and hurricanes combined, maybe around 7 hurricanes. So of the 14 to 15 named storms, maybe half of them or so become hurricanes, about 7. And then the major is normally right around 3. So this is what we consider to be our normal numbers. These numbers were bumped up a little bit a few years ago based on the increased climatology of storms. So what we consider to be normal today is about 1 number higher in each category than what it was a few years ago. Number of named storms this year that right now they're predicting is basically 23, give or take. But the bottom line is, it's a much higher number than normal. The number of hurricanes is up to about 11, give or take. Number of major hurricanes is 5, and so major hurricane is category 3 and greater, and we'll talk about why that is here in just a minute. The thing that jumps out at you.
Hello.
We can hear you. The things that jump out at you here is really this bottom number here. It's called the Accumulated Cyclone Energy Index, and so called ACE. Oh, somebody's not muted. Somebody's coming through. So anyway, if you look at the normal number for the ACE, this energy index is 123. And so this is taking a look at the sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic and the Gulf. It's looking at, basically what the climatological pattern looks like it's going to be in the long range. So basically how much energy is out there, with the lack of shear in the atmosphere combined with the warm sea surface temperatures. So what is the potential energy out there for hurricanes to tap into? And you do notice that number is almost double. And so that's probably more of the big concern, is the fact that right now a lot of the climate predictors are putting pretty high values out here for this accumulated cyclone energy index in the Atlantic. And so that's really what jumps out at you. And that's probably where, some of us as scientists are a little bit nervous. Just means that the conditions may be really primed out there for a good part of the summer to allow tropical systems to really kind of do what they want to do. So that's one of the things that we were watching, and we'll see what the trend is. Like I said, NOAA will come out with their forecast, later on, either this week or next week, and then the forecast will be updated again once you get into about July. Both Colorado State and NOAA will update their forecast. But right now, the numbers do look pretty high, and we just have to see where these systems form, and where they want to go. As far as hurricane season and how this plays out, we're getting a jump on it. Hurricane season doesn't officially start until June 1st, but if you look at the number of hurricanes in the yellow and the number of hurricanes and tropical storms combined in the red, you don't see a whole lot of activity in June. Even July, you don't see a whole lot of activity. You really got to get into, I'd say, the latter parts of August. Once you get past August 15th, and especially, past about August 28th, you see here about 2/3 of all hurricanes actually form after August 28th. So, we talk about hurricane season early. We can get an early season storm. They're typically weaker if we do see one early in the season. Once we get into past mid-August, that's when our attention really starts to kind of get turned up. And the thing I want to point out here is how late hurricane season really goes. Because if you look at the first 2 weeks of October, I mean, it still can be very, very active, even into early October, and even you see into almost late October. You're still have more activity in late October than what you do in early August, if you look at it that way. So the back end of the season is really troublesome for us. And the other thing that we deal with when we're dealing with storms, especially I'd say from, October and into even late September, but October into maybe early November, when we're dealing with these late season storms, they're usually hybrid storms. So they're usually a cross between like a hurricane and a nor'easter. And that really gets to be bad news for us. I like to call them superstorms because they're taking on the best of both worlds. So Hurricane Sandy that hit New Jersey, I mean, you could classify that as a superstorm. It wasn't a true hurricane. It wasn't a true nor'easter. It was the best of both worlds. It was massive. And so when these things become superstorms, they become very large. They impact much bigger areas. They produce a lot more rainfall. The wind reaches a lot farther, and usually they result in a lot more coastal flooding because they have more wind that lasts longer. So that's what Sandy was. Hurricane Gloria, when it came through many years ago, that's what that sunk the Andrea Gale. That was a superstorm. Hurricane Hazel that hit 1954. That's kind of a benchmark storm for our region. That would have also been a superstorm. It would not have been a true hurricane when it came up here. So some of these big names that you hear about that are late season for us, they're these hybrid systems that are very, very dangerous. And so that's why we get really concerned about the back half of hurricane season, not so much the front half of hurricane season. So we'll play it out kind of month by month. So this is June and July. So June on the left, anything that usually forms in June and July, it usually forms pretty close to the continental US. And really what's going on here is you'll have maybe a cold front, like we're seeing cold fronts right now sneak through, and they'll go out offshore and they'll stall and they'll stop right over the Gulf Stream or right over the Gulf of Mexico, and they'll sit out there developing showers and thunderstorms along the front. And then eventually a wave of low pressure may form that could become a tropical storm. It may get up to about maybe, let's say, 40, 45-mile-per-hour wind in it, and then it maybe comes in and maybe hits somewhere in the southeast US. Same thing kind of going on here in July, where you notice anything that's forming is usually just right off the coast. And so because of that, these typically are usually weaker variety storms. It might try to sneak up to hurricane status, but usually these are the weaker variety storms, just the weak tropical storms that can cause us, maybe some rainfall, some breezy conditions, but usually not the big storms in June and July. You get into August and September, and it's a whole different ball game. You're starting to see much more development now, way out here in the tropical parts of the Atlantic, near the equator, starting to work its way more down through the Bahamas. And by the time you get into September, you really see the whole Atlantic just becomes a breeding ground for tropical systems. So it's these longer track systems that are forming further out in the Atlantic, maybe passing just east of the Bahamas or coming up through the Bahamas. These are the ones that kind of get us. Anything that's doing like an Isabel track, staying, east of the Bahamas, just barely right up the right towards us, tracking northwest, and then coming right into North Carolina, and then right into our back neck of the woods, or worst case, something that comes in, it just kind of clips Cape Hatteras, rides along Nag's Head, and the system comes in right around Sandbridge. That's a nightmare scenario for us. Isabel was close to that track. Isabel just made landfall a little farther south. Florence was on the same track, but it had made a sharp left-hand turn, and instead of coming straight up into Virginia, it made that sharp turn, Cape Lookout, and then went straight into North Carolina towards Fayetteville. So we kind of dodged that bullet, and that was well forecast. But you definitely see how August and September, it's a whole different deal, and things change dramatically when you start talking about the activity and the longer track storms that get stronger. Now, even to October, you can still see quite a bit of formation here just offshore, and these systems can still become hurricanes. And this is when we're starting to get into more of our hybrid type systems. So, you know, it's not a true hurricane, it's not a true nor'easter, but they can be very ugly and very, very dangerous. So even though it looks like the activity is waning, on average it is, but you still see quite a bit of the Atlantic here lit up where you can see these things form. And again, when these things come into our neck of the woods, they're not truly tropical anymore, and they become big problems for us. And we'll show you some examples where in this time frame, late season storms, sometimes all they got to do is get close. It's almost like a hand grenade. It doesn't have to be right where you are, but once it goes off, you get hit by the shrapnel. So sometimes these storms get so big, you just have to be close, and you can still have some real big problems from them. And I'll show you guys an example of that. In November, things do transition here on the right. Things are getting cold. The sea surface temperatures are cooling, and your November storms are usually truly more nor'easters versus hurricanes. And so, if you're going to see any kind of storminess in November, I say it's more like a classic nor'easter at this point versus a tropical system, where especially in October, it can be these big superstorms. There's these hybrid type systems. I was going to pause just to make sure there's no questions, Scott, because I'm not watching the chat.
I think we're all in awe of what's going to be happening or the possibility of storms. So there's no questions right now, Jeff.
Okay. Okay. Good. So I think most of you guys know how this plays out. I'll just kind of rehash the whole thing that just so folks know the classification. So, you know, the way things will actually start out. In fact, the first thing you'll hear, which I don't have a slide for it, is you'll hear the Hurricane Center calling something an invest. And it'll say it's invest, and I'll give it a number. Invest, invest number 7 or invest number 8. And if you do hear the term invest, because I've heard them use it on the TV station sometimes, invest, if you hear that term, basically just means an area of interest. It's an area that the Hurricane Center wants to investigate. So when basically saying there's a cluster of showers and thunderstorms out there that they're monitoring, they'll actually they'll actually call it invest, and they'll give it a number. And sometimes you'll actually see that on the National Hurricane Center's website. And that just means it's an area of interest that they're monitoring and they're going to be investigating, but it's not anything defined yet. Now, once that area of interest starts to actually develop these clusters of showers and storms, and the storms become organized, they'll start rotating around each other, and you'll have this common area of low pressure form, really within the cluster of thunderstorms. And once you get this common area of low pressure, and the storms are starting to kind of get this rotation going, that's when you actually get your tropical depression. So tropical depression is really an organized cluster of storms they've got so much lift in that area, you're starting to develop this common area of low pressure, and the storms start to rotate around each other, and the winds are less than 39 miles an hour. So basically, it's just the area of low pressure, and it becomes a tropical depression. So it just means that the system's a little bit better organized. Now, if that organization continues to improve, and the low pressure system continues to get more intense, that's when you can get up to about 39 miles an hour. And so once you hit 39 miles an hour, this is when the storm gets its name. So up until this point, it's just been a number. So it's tropical depression number 1 or tropical depression number 2. Once it hits 39 miles an hour, that's when it's given its name. And so it becomes, tropical storm, whichever the next name is on the list. And tropical storms are pretty big wind range from 39 to 73 miles an hour. And that can be kind of tough, because, you can have a tropical storm come up here, and let's say, it comes up through the Pamlico Sound, it comes right into Chesapeake and across, Norfolk. And let's say it's a minimal tropical storm, and the winds may be about 39 to 40 miles per hour, let's say. That's not a big deal for us. Let's be honest. I mean, we get nor'easters stronger than that. So it's like, okay, well, it's a weak tropical storm. Watch out for the rainfall, but the wind's not going to be a problem. Now, if you get a strong tropical storm and it's making landfall with, say, 60 to 65 mile per hour wind, and it's coming across the border with 50 mile an hour wind, that's a little bit different. I mean, that's now a strong tropical storm, and that's gonna cause more issues with respect to wind. So it's a pretty broad range there. And so the weaker variety tropical storms, they're not going to cause us a lot of issues with wind. Can still bring flooding, can still bring tornadoes, but not a wind issue. But if you get a high-end tropical storm, technically Isabel was a high-end tropical storm. I mean, I would argue it was a very low-end hurricane. But if you think back, if anybody experienced Isabel, you were right on the threshold between tropical storm and hurricane, to put that in perspective. So that was a lot of wind and a lot of wind damage, and that was, you could say it was a hurricane, but it was barely a hurricane. We did not have hurricane force sustained winds. And so that kind of gives you an idea of how you can have a tropical storm intensity very close to what Isabel was. So just something to keep in mind. Once we hit 74 mile per hour, that's when it becomes a hurricane. So once the winds inside the eye get to 74 and higher, obviously it goes from being called a tropical storm to a hurricane at that magical number of 74. So just a reminder that we rank the hurricanes really based on wind only. And that's the main thing I want to stress with this slide. So you have the Saffir-Simpson scale, categories 1 through 5, and it is strictly a wind scale. And so, we reach major hurricane status at category 3 at 111 miles an hour. And we'll talk about why that is here in a second. Um, the thing about the hurricane scale that can be misleading is, you could have a tropical storm or even a low in category 1, and you say, okay, it's not going to be, absolutely devastating, but it could still drop 20 inches of rain. And that 20 inches of rain could be a huge problem for the city and the surrounding areas. It could also create a lot of storm surge. Now, you may have a system very similar to it, and instead of dropping 20 inches of rain, let's say it's moving really fast. It comes in, it gets in and out of here really quickly, and it only drops 6 to 8 inches of rain. So, you know, the amount of rainfall that these things can bring and the amount of flooding varies quite a bit, and it can vary from storm to storm, and that's why the Saffir-Simpson scale is purely a wind scale only, and we actually forecast the threat of heavy rain and flooding, and we forecast the threat of coastal storm surge separately from wind because it's not always a 1-to-1. I mean, a Category 1 or 2 hurricane, but depending on the storm, I mean, everyone's different. It's like they all have their different personalities. Some can bring a lot of rain, some maybe not so much. Some can bring a lot of storm surge depending on how it hits. Others not so much. So, everyone is different, and that's why when we talk about the Saffir-Simpson scale, we're only talking about the wind rating, and we have to look at storm surge and rainfall separately. So why do we go with major hurricane at category 3? What's the deal? I mean, why, what's the magic number there? And really what it gets into is really trying to define the wind forces. So this is your Saffir-Simpson scale talking about the different degrees of damage that you might see at the different categories. So at category 1, very dangerous winds produce some damage. Well-constructed frame houses will have some damage to the roof, shingles coming off, vinyl siding coming off, gutters, typically lighter kind of damage to your structures. I'm going to jump all the way up here to category 3. At category 3, now it says well-built frame houses may incur major damage or removal of basically the roof decking. So basically, you're losing the entire roof, losing gabled ends, talking about many trees being snapped and uprooted, electricity and water unavailable for several days to weeks. And so, why is there so much damage? I've only gone up from 74 miles an hour to 111. So, I've increased the wind speed there from 74 to 111. Well, wind and air have weight to it. So the atmosphere has weight. So that's why, when the wind blows really hard, you can feel that pressure against you because the air is moving and the air has weight to it, just like water has weight to it. So when you look at a category 3 hurricane, the amount of force that wind applies onto structures is about 30 times stronger than what that wind would have been in a category 1. So in a category 1 hurricane, if we say the wind is a force factor of 1, a category 3 at this point, that wind force is 30 times stronger than what it was when it was a category 1. So 74 to 111 miles an hour increases the wind pressure by 30 times. That's a lot. And at that point, there's not much that's going to be withstanding it. Well-built structures are going to start to come apart. Some of your hurricane type of bracing and things is going to start failing. Other things that start happening at these type of speeds when you start getting into high end 2s and 3s is, you can have a well-built structure, well-built home or building, but now you have so much debris that's being generated, trees, you have, other pieces of people's homes, outbuildings. There's so much being blown around by the wind. You have all these missiles, and these missiles are impacting other buildings. And so maybe what was a nice building is being impacted by basically debris that's being blown around at high speed. And as that debris hits that building, the building starts to become damaged and compromised. And then once wind gets inside the building, now then that building fails. Even though it was a good building and it was actually holding up to the wind, the debris got it. And this happens a lot when you start getting into your higher end category storms where it's just stuff, there's so much being blown around, kind of all bets are off. So that's why we have category 3 major hurricane. And Scott, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Does Norfolk have any shelters that are even designated to category 2? I don't know if anybody around here has category 2 rated shelters.
I'll check, Jeff, but I think our 2 schools, I believe Campostella was graded as a 2 when it was
Okay.
built.
Okay, I know there's not many, and I think Virginia Beach maybe has 1 or 2 as well. So I think it's much more selective though, as far as what's rated for these higher wind speeds. Would you agree? As far as
Yeah,
shelters.
exactly. Yes. Our shelters are our schools, and even though they're brick and steel beams, they were built several years ago, and they're not as well built as the new one we have, and we're pretty confident over at STEM with the new construction there.
Yeah, and so, we always say hide from the wind. So, if folks are staying here, riding out the storm, this is the first threat. So, if folks are riding out at home, whether you have to go to work and your family has to stay home, just assess the threat here. Can trees reach the house? What's the threat from wind damage, as far as the house? Now, if you folks are going to be riding out the storm at home, it's not a flood threat there. We'll come back to that. Hide from the wind. And so when the wind blows, have folks, in the lowest floor towards the middle of the structure, basically hiding from the wind, just as if it was a tornado. Every storm that's come up here in Hampton Roads that has had at least some decent wind with it, Hurricane Irene, Hurricane Isabel, we've lost people to falling trees, where falling trees have come through people's homes, or they've come through the side of apartment complexes, and people are up in their bedrooms. They're sitting there watching television, and the couch is backed up against an exterior wall, and a tree comes through the wall, and all of a sudden, the person's crushed. So we have lost people to
Casey,
falling trees in just about all the big high wind events as far as tropical systems. And Irene and Isabel especially, I know we lost a few folks to falling trees. So hide from the wind, be smart about it. Make sure you educate your family if you're going to be riding it out. When that really starts to howl, you know, it may be a couple hours that you're having to kind of take cover and sit in the middle of the house, but you want to hide from the wind, and be prepared for that. You don't want to, stuff can come through that walls, and it gets pretty nasty. So these are the names for this year. I don't see if anybody in the audience has any of these names. Take a quick glance at it. It's interesting to try to maybe figure out which is going to be the first hurricane. We have a poll at the office going, which one's going to be the first hurricane of the year. I picked Ernesto as being the first actual hurricane of the year. We'll see. Some people picked Debbie, so we kind of we got an office poll going. Try to figure out which one may become East Coast storms. It's I guess that's how meteorologists have fun with weather. I hope none of them hit us. So, but we did kind of have a poll as far as which one maybe the East Coast storm if we get one this year. But this is the name for this year, that the Hurricane Center, they'll be working through these names. You do see some coming back around, by the way. Some of you probably recognize Ernesto. Ernesto was a pretty nasty storm up here many years ago, created quite a bit of coastal flooding, and some high winds back when I was in Morehead City. But they didn't retire it. Alberto and Burrell are coming back around again. So you're seeing some of these names that you may actually recognize that we've had to deal with in the past because they weren't bad enough to be retired. And Ernesto is the one that jumps out at me when I see it, because I just know I worked that storm in the past when I was in Morehead City. So how often do we deal with hurricanes? So the main thing here is the Outer Banks, Cape Hatteras by far, if you look at the entire map, they deal with one about every 5 years, about every 5 to 7 years. So, there's more activity that kind of grazes the North Carolina coast than anywhere else on the entire map, even including Key West. You look at the Keys down here, they're eight, Miami's six, and Hatteras is five. New Orleans is running around maybe every 7 years. One comes close enough. So there's a really big hotbed of activity, that comes up across the Mid-Atlantic, and Hatteras and the Outer Banks, they're kind of target number one, and they get, storms can come up the coast and just kind of glance them and go out to sea. They can come straight in. Either way, if it's coming anywhere close to Cape Hatteras, you guys know here in Norfolk, we're dealing with something. We're going to have some tidal flooding. We're going to have some heavy rain. Maybe a little bit of coastal flooding. It's just a matter of how close the storm comes to us and what else is going on. So, you know, as far as a hurricane coming up, right in our backyard or coming pretty close to us, that's about every 13 years. But we're dealing with these systems as much as almost North Carolina is, because a lot of times, like I said, all it's got to do is come close, and it can cause us some real headaches if it gets close enough. So sometimes Cape Hatteras is close enough, and I'll show you some examples where that causes us some real problems. So just something to put in perspective, that we live just north of really one of the hottest areas for hurricane activity, in the entire Atlantic and Gulf Coast. So the other thing we talk about, with the forecast track and the graphic, that this is something that's really important, and it gets lost sometimes. I think the media is doing a little bit better job. We've gotten very good at forecasting where the hurricane's going to go. They gotten very, very accurate at trying to predict. And you guys have seen this. You hear about it for days on end. They say it's coming. By the time it gets here, you're tired of hearing about it. We've been preparing for this thing for like 5 days now, and so we've really gotten accurate as far as trying to predict where these things are going to go. And when you see a graphic like this, and we call this the error cone. This is just predicting where the center of the storm may be. So the center of the storm, this is in this example here, 5 p.m. Wednesday. So by the time I get out to, let's say Thursday afternoon, the center of the storm should be somewhere right within this white cone. So it should be somewhere, over the Florida Peninsula. That's pretty good confidence that this is where the storm will be. The problem is when you see these cones like this on television or you see them on the web, it's just predicting where the center of the storm is. So here is this orange circle that you see here, and I'm gonna zoom into it. This orange circle that you see, that is how big the storm actually is. So that's how far out the tropical storm force winds extend. And you can see this storm is much bigger than this error cone. So if this storm is going to be, on the left edge of this error cone, the winds extend much further beyond that. So if I go back and I try to say, okay, for this storm here, just this storm in particular, how far out, at what point does this tropical storm wind field actually fall within the entire air cone? And it's almost 3 days out. I almost have to go to Friday evening. And this is a forecast for Tuesday. I almost have to go out to Friday before the wind actually even falls inside the air cone. So the bottom line is this is not a threat graphic. So for example, if this storm's going to ride up on the left-hand side and let's say make landfall somewhere, way over here, this wind cone is going to extend all the way to Tallahassee. Even though Tallahassee isn't in the cone, the track cone, they're going to be. I can guarantee you they're going to be in the wind field because the wind field's bigger than the air cone. So just, I know I'm harping on it a little bit. Just realize when you see these cones, these tracks come out, that's not a threat cone. That's just telling you where the center of the storm might be, and the storm, is over 100 miles plus across. So just be aware of that. So what we do provide from the Hurricane Center is they now come up with wind probabilities. So this is taking the track of the storm and it's forecasting how big is the storm going to be, and what's the probability you're going to see tropical storm force winds of about 50 miles an hour, and then also winds of, let's say, of hurricane force. So they give you 3 different ranges. So in this example here, if I'm looking for Norfolk, I can say, okay, you know what? Even though the storm's way out here east of the Bahamas, in the Hampton Roads region, yeah, we have about a 60 to 70% chance of getting tropical storm force winds. And those winds will be here probably by around Thursday at 8 p.m. And so this is a threat graphic. So the Hurricane Center is producing wind probability threat graphics that make a little bit more sense, that say, okay, the center of the storm is really going to be way down here in Jacksonville, North Carolina. But the storm is going to be big enough where we do have a 60 to 70% probability of seeing tropical storm conditions at Thursday night. And so this is kind of a quick way to do more of a threat assessment. And this will be on the National Hurricane Center page and also in the briefings that we send out. So to give you an example of what this might look like, here's an example from Hurricane Florence. So this was early on in the forecast, and you can kind of see here Norfolk kind of in the error cone. So you say, okay, well, it's making landfall down here as a major hurricane near Jacksonville. We're in the air cone, so we'll see what happens. We'll see where it goes. A little bit later on, still forecasting it to make landfall down there in Jacksonville, North Carolina. We're still in the cone, but the back edge of the cone looks like it's getting further away. And then all of a sudden, the forecast comes out like this, and all of a sudden, we're out of the air cone. And I've seen it even from folks I know in Florida. As soon as they get outside the air cone, they're like, "Oh, we're good." Hey, we're no longer, there's no longer a threat. So we don't have to worry about it because we're not in the cone. Unfortunately, that's not reality because it just depends upon the size of the storm and where the storm is inside this cone. So compare that to a little bit later. Now I say, okay, look, the air cone's even further south. So it's okay. Look, now Norfolk's way out of it. We're good to go. We don't have any issues. Maybe, maybe not. That's where you really have to dive into the local forecast, because just because you're outside the cone doesn't mean anything. And in fact, if you go back and look at the wind probabilities, that's what I showed you earlier. We still had a 60%, 60 to 70% chance of tropical storm force winds, even though the storm system was way down here. we still had a 60-70% chance that we were going to see at least tropical storm force winds. Not much of it. There was no chance of hurricane force winds, but at least some tropical storm force winds. This is what actually happened. This was the briefing that we sent out. And so we were forecasting winds of almost 50 miles an hour. So even though the storm was making landfall in Jacksonville, North Carolina, we were still going to see some decent wind. Nothing we couldn't deal with, but something you got to be prepared for. I mean, it's going to be windy. So, securing loose objects, realizing some of the bridges may be kind of tough. The Bay Bridge Tunnel is going to be closed probably for a certain amount of time. Dealing with this much wind, they're not going to. At least they're going to be very restricted. They might actually close altogether, depending on when the winds get too strong. So there's going to be some impact to the region. It's not like you can just slough it off. In that's even though the hurricane was making landfall down in Jacksonville, North Carolina, it was a big one. Florence was a big storm, and there were some other things influencing our winds up here as well. So, we were expecting quite a bit of wind, even 40-mile-an-hour wind in Richmond, 39-mile-an-hour gusts. And it was. This was still a pretty big windstorm for us. And it also was moving very slow. So it was windy for like almost an entire day because it moved very slow as it went into North Carolina. It had a very, 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 if you notice, it slowed down its track as it went into North Carolina. And so as it was going into North Carolina, we had a really strong northeast wind coming off the bay and the ocean, feeding into that storm. And so that's where the wind probabilities really did a good job, showing that. And then looking at our forecast, I mean, we were forecasting tropical storm force winds just because of the how strong that hurricane was. And
So
then of course
Jeff, can
go
I
ahead.
jump in?
Yeah, go ahead.
So we're talking about the winds and everything affecting the city, even though we're just outside or inside the cone, but there's no rain. So I know a lot of people, if they don't get that rain with the winds, it's just a windy day or a bad wind. And we have a lot to educate our folks that, like you said earlier, the wind is the most damaging when it comes out there, even if you don't get those raindrops or the heavy downfall. So just pointing out the damage that the wind can do is great. Thank you.
No, it's good. Yeah, and rain can become a factor in with the wet soils. If it's been wet ahead of the system, or if you're getting a lot of heavy rain, right before the system comes up, and then when the winds peak, by the time the winds peak, let's say you've already had about 7, 8 inches of rain, that can be a big problem. In this case, in Florence case, the ground was dry. I don't think we got much rain out of this system from this one, but soft soils can be a big problem. They can definitely exacerbate the issue with power outages and trees coming down if the ground is soft. So you look at the wind, you realize you're getting 50-mile-an-hour winds. There's going to be spotty power outages. There's going to be issues. This probably also I think this had a little bit of coastal flooding issue with it because of that northeast wind. So still a little bit of a problem there with moderate tidal flooding. And then, are we going to get the rain with the storm or is it going to be dry? So there's a lot of aspects to the hurricane. And that really gets to the point where every single one of these is different. You really have to peel across peel the layers of the onion back to try to figure out, okay, exactly what is this storm going to do and what does it mean for me? Because every single one of these things is different. And then you can get into our hour by hour forecast. And so, what are we predicting every single hour? And I'll show you guys how to get to this. It is busy, but it does, you can get the hourly timing. Here's your wind direction and wind speed. So this is kind of right here, an east northeast wind at 45 miles an hour. Eventually it's going to be gusting up to about 60 to 65 miles an hour. Here the wind shifts, it becomes northwest. So that's wind from the northwest. So you can kind of get an idea, how long is the wind going to be above 40 miles an hour? I mean, when are the winds going to get below 40? And so this would show me, okay, 4 o'clock this afternoon, these winds should be getting down below 40 miles an hour. Still a little bit breezy in the evening, but it gives me my timing of the wind and also the wind speed and wind direction. So, how long is it going to blow? How bad is it going to be at my location? Down here you see the rain bars. So where it's big and green like this means there's going to be solid rain. How much rainfall? So you can kind of see here until about 1 o'clock this afternoon, we're going to have 3.19 inches of rain, over 3 inches of rain. And then after about 2 o'clock, maybe I'll get about another 0.65 inches of rain. And then after about 7 or 8, now it's only down to about 0.03. So you can even get an idea of the timing of when the heavier rain is going to be falling. If you look at these green bars down here, you can kind of see these rainfall amounts in different time frames. So it gives you an idea of when are we really going to get those big downpours and for how long. So you can kind of see that rain timing. So the wind timing up here in the wind section and the rain is probably the most useful in here. And I'll let me see what's next. Yeah, I'll tell you what. Let me I can show you really quickly just how to get to that since it's really, I'll show you really easy. So when you go to the Wakefield National Weather Service website, you just go into Norfolk right here. The map's interactive. Many of you have probably seen this before. Click on Norfolk. And when you click on it, you'll see the week at a glance forecast there. And then you can see where you clicked. So you can move this around. If I'm more interested in finding out what's happening on Willoughby, I can click up here. If I'm more interested, what's going on in downtown Norfolk, I can click on the map. Notice the page updated. Now my square is right over downtown Norfolk. And so this is the forecast there, kind of right for downtown. Again, you can move this map around and do anything you want to with it. If you keep on scrolling down, you get to this hourly weather graph or hourly weather forecast. So you get to that, you click on it, and then it'll pull up the hourly weather forecast. And so you have all the different weather elements there. Here's your wind direction, northwest at 10 miles an hour. Tomorrow's northwest at about 15 miles an hour. You can see what's going on here. Brown line is your chance of rain. So about a 30% chance of rain later today. And then really only about a 10% chance tomorrow. Those the green bars right there. You can clean the map up if you want. If that's too much, you can turn off certain things. So if you want to, say, I don't care about dew point. Notice heat index is in here if you do like that, for especially for folks working outdoors. If I want to turn off my humidity, you can turn things on and off and just hit resubmit, and it'll clean up the chart. Other thing, realize, let's say the storm is hitting like maybe 3 days from now. And so, this only shows 2 days worth of the forecast. So, what, say, I want to start looking at the forecast starting, let's say Friday morning at 6 a.m. because I'm worried about Friday, Saturday. So come down here, say Friday morning, we'll start at 5 a.m. and hit resubmit. And now what's going to happen is it's going to update. And on the left-hand side here is Friday morning at 5 a.m. And then now you're looking out into the future 2 days from Friday, if that makes sense. So this is Friday, this is Friday night, and then this is Saturday. So you can move the forecast ahead just by selecting a start time right here if you want to. Or you can just use this forward 2 days as well to move the forecast ahead. So that's the hourly weather forecast. Just click on Norfolk and go down there and click on this hourly forecast. You can bookmark it on your phone. Like I got this bookmarked on my smartphone. Actually, I have this page bookmarked on my smartphone for Smithfield, where I live, and I can just access the forecast right away. And then if I want the hourly, I just come over here and click on the hourly and pull it right up. As far as the Hurricane Center stuff I showed you guys, the track information, the wind probabilities, how do you get to that? Okay, but just go to the Wakefield Weather Service webpage, and then just, instead of clicking on the map, just scroll down a little bit, and you see a big hurricane icon. Really easy. Click on the hurricane icon. It'll pull up our tropical page. Right now, sorry about that. Right now, it gives you the tropical weather outlook. So is there anything out there that could form in the next 2 days or the next five to 7 days? And right now, there's nothing out there that could form. If there was, you could click on the map, and then they'll blow it up, and you can read the discussion of what the Hurricane Center is, tracking. If there are active storms, a tab will come up here at the very top right here next to Outlook, and it'll say active storms. And you click on that tab, and it will give you all of the graph new tab right here. It'd be the very first tab next to Outlook. Click on it, and it will have all those graphics that I told you about. It'll have the storm surge graphics, the track graphic, the wind probability graphic. It'll all be right here. So you don't have to go hunting around on different web pages. You can just go to the Wakefield page, click on the tropical icon, and you can see all the Hurricane Center graphics. And then if you want to get your local forecast, you can click on the map and get your local forecast. So should be able to get everything from weather.gov, from right here from the Wakefield website. Get that out of the way. All right. So let's switch gears really quickly and talk about water, because, Norfolk, that's one of our big things. I mean, we are surrounded by water. Water is one of our bigger issues, whether it's coming from the sky or coming from the ocean and the bay. So the first thing we deal with, obviously, with this